Hello everyone, thanks for tuning in. Today's webinar about building a GraphQL API with StepZen. So maybe as you're also in this webinar, you already know a bit or two about StepZen. So maybe you already know what StepZen is and how you can use it. But in case you don't, let me quickly run you through it. So my name is Roy. I'm working in the developer advocate team for StepZen. And one of the things we also like to do is telling you about StepZen and telling you how to use it, especially for building GraphQL APIs. So StepZen is a tool to make building GraphQL APIs really easy. As you can see on our website, you can have a GraphQL API in minutes on your own data and on the SaaS APIs that you use. And on those SaaS APIs and its own data, something we'll be telling you way more about. And in short, it's an easy way to create GraphQL APIs just using GraphQL schema language. So you don't have to deal with building your own resolvers or building a lot of custom code. Instead, you can just write GraphQL schema language, which also makes it platform agnostic. So you're not tied to specific programming languages. You can use JavaScript, TypeScript, Python, whatever you like, because StepZen is helping you building the APIs and not so much helping you building the actual server by writing your own code. So from our website, you can find the product we're going to be telling you about today, and that product is called GraphQL Studio. There are multiple ways to get there, but one of the ways to get there is going to here. So you can get more information about what you can do with GraphQL Studio. And I already told you can bring your own data sources, as you saw on the website, on the homepage. But instead, you can also use existing SaaS APIs. And those SaaS APIs could be actual SaaS companies or just companies that are providing third-party APIs. And especially for you and everyone that's watching, we made a small curation for you already. So I think it's quite a lot of APIs that we selected pre-hand that are working very well with StepZen. We make sure that the experience with these is smooth. But besides that, you can always bring your own APIs, as I'll be showing you later on. So StepZen Studio is the product you can find right here. And whenever you click on StepZen Studio, it will bring you to our Studio experience. And our Studio experience is quite similar to what you might already know from GraphQL Playground or GraphQL interfaces. You will have on the left side things you can choose, like queries, selection of queries, APIs, and then you have the middle pane where you can actually see the schema, where you can see the queries, and then you have the right pane in which you can see the result of those queries, operations, or whatever you're doing here. And in here you can find pre-selected combinations from us. So if you would go to our YouTube channel, which maybe you're already watching through YouTube, you can find that there already are a lot of examples for this. So an example for developer publishing pack. There's a great example there on how you can build a personal portfolio using these tools. And then there are way other combinations. So another combination we talk about a lot is the Frankfurter combination, which will give you local currency based on your IP. So usually I'm in Amsterdam. Today I'm in Berlin. I will be using this API. It will get my IP from Berlin instead of from Amsterdam, and probably the currency will be the same because everywhere in Europe we're using dollar, we're using euros. But if you're watching from another country in the world, you might be using different currencies over there. So for Europe, you wouldn't see any surprises by using this combination, but for any other country that has different currencies, then probably you will see different results for this. So we can either choose one of those combinations, which you can already find on our YouTube channel, or we're going to go and build our own combination of schemas. So for this, you have a wide range of APIs to select from. And later on, I'm going to show you how you can use your own data source. But for now, we're going to be looking at the already pre-selected APIs. And here you can find the whole list of schemas. So maybe if you're using Airtable for tons of things, you can use Airtables for CMS. You can use it to store small bits and pieces you want to display somewhere, an example on your website. Then you could select Airtable and use mock data, an example. And if you're using Airtable, you will need to select a lot of information. So you would have something called an Airtable base ID and an Airtable API key. And these are perfectly fine because if you're using Airtable, we'll make sure these things are secure and we won't leak them to the outside world. But let's start with mock data first. So looking at mock data, you can see we have something called the Airtable queries. We have a table name, which is always in the form of a string. As we're mocking here, it doesn't really matter what we insert because it's mock data. And then we have the query name. And you can see the query name is prefixed with Airtable underscore. And we do this to make sure that we don't have any strange mergers of queries or types or whatsoever, because that's something you want to prevent. You don't want your types to get somehow constrained, or you don't have any merge conflicts whenever we pull together all the data. So for Airtable, we have this query called Airtable underscore table data. Let's assume you might have your own API with the same query name, then you will get conflicts. So therefore, it's always wise to do it like this and actually have a prefix. That's where you're definitely sure that you won't see anything strange popping up. And as this is mock data, we can just run it, and then we will get some arbitrary information here. So maybe zoom out a little so we can have a nicer overview. So if we will be using the actual Airtable interface or actual Airtable API, then we will be getting records with actual data, and this is mock data. But as you can see, it's not mocked pretty nicely. If you're familiar with Airtable, in Airtable you have a spreadsheet, let's call it like Google Sheets or Excel, and these are all you can all discover them through an API. This is a REST API that they're offering, as far as I know, but maybe there is also a GraphQL API. And these consist of certain fields. You will have to create a time, the time at which you create the actual record in your table, because we're looking at one table only, and then a bunch of fields. So all these records will have fields in them, and of course they have a specific ID. So this is mock data. If you want to not use mock data, it also says here some schemas need configuration, and you can configure it right here. So you only need your Airtable base ID, and my password manager is trying to use this as a password field because it is a secure field, and that's something important to keep in mind. Whenever you're using GraphQL Studio, we make sure that your credentials are safe. But if you're not running a GraphQL server, then make sure these things are safe. So for Airtable, I haven't inserted my my environment variables just yet, but something else I inserted my variables for is Etsy. And let me double check it. Yes, so I've already inserted my my API key. I could also show it to you if you want, but let's make sure I'll keep it secure. And I also have these beforehand. So Etsy is a marketplace in which you can buy and sell like products that are made by someone else. So these are usually physical products, and these can be like really cute candle lights, or maybe a T-shirt that was designed by a specific person that's really into specific artwork. So if you would go for Etsy, you can find all these things in here. You can see we have queries to find shops, and you can see these are also prefixed again. So for every API that you can find in GraphQL Studio, you can find the queries or other operations are prefixed. And we do this, as I mentioned before, in order to make sure that there isn't any conflicts in bringing these operations together. Because you have all this wide range of selection of APIs, and you can imagine maybe sometimes queries have the same name. So for find shops, it's probably fine as we don't have other contemporary marketplaces in here. But you can imagine if you have maybe Twitter or Spotify or anything else that's using OAuth, usually you have an operation called me in order to get the information from the currently logged in user. So for Etsy, I won't mention there will be any merge conflicts from bringing the schemas together. But for other APIs, I can imagine it could be the case. So let's find some interesting ones. You can also look for shops. So let's clean this a bit up. Something else I like to do, and something else we can do later on, like bringing multiple queries together. An example, start looking at Etsy and find shops. So let's find some vintage shops. And as I already have inserted my API key from Etsy here, which is securely stored. This is something nice to mention. So your keys are always stored in local storage on your own machine. So as long as you're within the GraphQL Studio experience, your keys will be in your local storage. So as long as I don't show my network request to you, I should be fine and things are safe. And also StepZen is doing this request server side. So whenever you open your terminal or someone else to do this request, there's no way they can find out what your API keys are, unless you're actually giving to them. And that's something we'll be looking at later on, maybe if I give you some hints in order to build a React application with this. I won't be doing that today, but I will give you some insights on how you can do this. And then later on YouTube channel, you can find more end-to-end examples, which we actually have APIs to GraphQL Studio, deploy them on StepZen, and then later on query them from a React application. But for now, your keys are safe because they're in local storage and I'm the only one that can have this view. And by looking at this, we can see we're going to find shops. We're going to use a shop name, something with vintage in it. And then we have our Etsy API key in there. I can see it finds a lot of shops because Etsy has a lot of vintage people on there. But maybe we can put in something else. There are really cool things on Etsy that are selling there. Also related to maybe airline brands or related to any other things from pop culture. So maybe if you're into Harry Potter, do something like this. And you can see there is also shops based for Harry Potter. And that's the cool thing. There's a lot of people that actually make things with Harry Potter, Avengers, and all these other things from pop or media culture you might like. So by using it in a shop name, it's actually a search and it will find all the shops with a name in there. And you can see some shops don't even have a name, so probably these shops aren't that active yet. And so this is just the things we put in here in StepZen GraphQL Studio. But of course, there are more things you could do with this query. So let's have a look at the schema. And for that, it might be more convenient to have a look through the documentation and try and find Etsy find shops here. So we have a query called Etsy find shops, and then let's find out what we can do. So we can also do more things like inserting a limit, an offset. So we can also say, just give us the first 5 ones, this, and it will give us only 5 shops instead of 51 we saw before. But then for our response, there are probably more things we could do. So let's have another look. If we try find shops again, in here you can see the arguments. So the API key is something we prevented, which is also a secret type. We have the shop name, and we have the limit, which we inserted ourselves. So let's have a look at some other results you might get back. So we have the count, of course, and then we have the results, which are of type Etsy shop. And in here we can find more things like is shop US based. So for me, I'm living in Europe. If you're in the US, it's probably it's often quite hard to ship things across the globe, and some stores even don't do it. So having something like is shop US based might be a nice one. Might be something later on you maybe want to put in your filters as well. And then we can also have the shop ID, which we already have, shop name, title is there, and then what I was looking for was the URL. There's also something we can query, and this will give us the URL to the actual Etsy shop. So you can just go there and already start shopping a Harry Potter jewelry. But that's not what I wanted to show, because we can also combine this with difficult or other APIs. So another API I found out for you was the Unsplash API. So let me find it in the list. So we have it right here. So the Unsplash API, it's also an API that I inserted before. You can see our Etsy queries are still here, but now it also added our Unsplash queries. So these are for Unsplash, which if you don't know it, it's a tool to get images based on a keyword or a set of keywords, and these images are usually copyright free. So you can just use them on your website, in your portfolio, or maybe not your portfolio if you're a photographer. But if you're like me, if you're blogging about development and other things in tech, then it might be nice to use these things for your portfolio. And then of course it's always nice to give them a shout out and actually mention the party which you use the image from. And now is also one of the trickier part, because now we have 2 queries, so we can actually select what type of queries you want to run. So we can either run the Etsy query, which we saw before, or we can now run the Unsplash query, which we have now. And this is basically a search on red, but we're in Harry Potter mode. Let's try Harry Potter here. Splash ones, and then you can find we found all these Harry Potter articles. And this might be looking a bit weird because we have just one field here called keywords, but still we get results, which is an array of multiple fields. And that is unfortunately a limitation of the Unsplash API, because if we would go to the documentation and find the Unsplash query, we can see we have query.unsplash.search, and we see we have all these other arguments. For now, we're just using Unsplash client ID and a query. We could do other things like color or content filter or search within certain collections, because Unsplash also has connections of different images that might be alike or are from the same person. But that's not what I wanted to show you, because we can see we have just one field and a response as a whole blob of information. And this feels very GraphQL unlike. So let's see why this is happening. So let's go back and find Unsplash search. Let's type it in here. And for this, you can also see why it's actually, let's make a small sidestep, why it's actually important to have these prefixes. So search could also be present in one of the other APIs in there. So the Etsy queries don't have a search, but they could have a search, and then it would get really messy. So let's make sure we get the Unsplash search. Let's look at the return type, because it's defining what we're seeing here. And it actually makes sense now, because you can see results is a JSON. So it's not actually a type, but instead it's a JSON. And the JSON might be typed if you're using TypeScript, but if you don't, it's actually just a JSON blob. So which meaning we don't have any results, any control in GraphQL Studio or in StepZen GraphQL Studio about the response type of results. So this is one nice way to do it. Something else you can try is go for and combining these things together. So you can see now they're so divided in two different things. So what were we doing? We were looking for, in our previous example, we were looking for find shops. Yes, indeed. Back. Let's get rid of some of these APIs and now just try and merge them together. So instead of having all these things separately, we could just do this, bring them together, get rid of this one, and then I'm not seeing any copy paste in here. No, this is actually my computer doing something strange. Let's just try and refresh. And let's try again. So what were we doing? We were getting rid of this one and actually combining these two things. But now we don't have to run separate queries, because now we brought them all together. So maybe let's not call this Etsy queries.
You're still not showing your screen, Roy.
So that was what's going wrong. So let me get back to sharing this Chrome tab. Thank you, Anthony. So what was happening? So let me refresh again. So my computer somehow broke. Let's get back to what I was doing. So what I was doing, I was trying to bring together these two queries. So we have our Etsy queries, which are separated here, and we have our Unsplash queries, which are separated here. And when we run them now, we also need to run them separately. But if you want to have all the results at once, you just need to bring these two things together. So let's go to arguments, copy paste that one here. And then let's make sure we're going to bring these two together. So instead of having two different queries defined, we're going to bring these things together and unite them as old friends. Now we have just one query to run. It's easier for you now, because now you can have both results at once. So maybe we're not looking for a shop name, which was Harry Potter, and we can run it. So let's get rid of all the queries we don't use. So all these Unsplash things, all these Etsy things, and just have these two. So now we can look for two things at the same time, right? Because we're going to looking for within Etsy, or let's just maybe call this my queries, because it's doing more than just Etsy. It's bringing together an Etsy find shops query and the Unsplash search query. And when we run this, it will run perfectly fine. To do several things, it will get all the shops that have Harry Potter in them from Etsy, and it will search Unsplash for all the photos that are having something to do with Harry Potter. And then, of course, we can bring this together even nicer. So let's do this. Maybe, well, it's fine to have it here, actually. So now we have looking for shop name Harry Potter and a query Harry Potter. And now we're doing it from GraphQL Studio. But the actual nice part is that we can also bring these things to our own device. So you might have noticed that there's an endpoint on top of here. And this is an endpoint you can use from anywhere else. So what you could do is publish it. You could copy paste it. Don't copy paste it directly in your browser because it will, assuming that you're sending it some sort of API key. But instead you can press the publish button. And in here you can see, well, why you should create a StepZen account in order to get the full benefits, or how you can explore it even more. So you can use your GraphQL API. We've added 2 schemas. We can go back, add more, and you can access it via the URL below in GraphQL, or download the sample project code. So one thing we could do is click here, go to GraphQL, and then it's going to share my other screen. So let's just try and put it in here, which will show you the GraphQL interface. And in here, we can also explore the same query. And you can see we have the schemas combined here. So we have our Etsy things. But if we scroll down, we will also have our Unsplash things. And this is also a nice way if you want to have a bit more, well, a bit more freedom in order to do things here. So if you go here, you can actually define the query variables yourself. Whereas in StepZen Studio, you're limited to using just the API keys there. So if we would go back to the previous query, something we could do actually is, well, define the Harry Potter string as a keyword and then try and do it. So let me get back one step more. So what we had here was Unsplash, and let's also bring the other one back, which was Etsy. And then instead of opening it in external GraphQL, we're going to bring it to my computer. Let's do again what we did before. So we have my queries. We're going to looking for finding shops, and we're going to be doing stuff with Unsplash as well. So let's get our Unsplash client ID. And then get rid of this one as well. This here. And then only leave the Unsplash search query. Let's select this. So we can run this again. But as I mentioned, the upside of using GraphQL would be that you can actually change the values for these arguments. So these arguments are now hard-coded somewhere safe because, of course, you don't want to expose any credentials from you. So let's leave them in here. Let's also get back to Harry Potter there and query there. And of course, it's suboptimal because we want to add a argument there that we can actually use on your own API. So let's bring it to my computer. And for this, I'm going to be pressing publish again. And instead of exploring GraphQL using this button, the thing I'm going to be doing is downloading the code. So now it will download a zip file. And as it says here, this downloads a zip file that contains the schema starter files and configuration to use with your StepZen account or anywhere else. So I would be opening this zip file, which you can't see on the screen just yet. So bear with me for a bit while I'm copying these files to a VS Code interface. So this, let me see if I'm copying all the files correctly. So bear with me. Okay, and then I will be copying this file as well, and then the final file, and then I will share my screen with you again, because I also need to be copying my client credentials. Please bear with me for another second. Just copying now my Etsy credentials and then also the ones from Splash. Yes, so now I should be able to go back and share my screen with you again. And then I will be sharing my entire screen. Yes. So what I've just done, I've copy and pasted the files, and I can get rid of this file. Well, I can do it later. So I copy pasted them all in this file. So it's called StepZen Webinar Roy, because that's what we're doing today. I have my configuration.yaml file, and in here you can find your client credentials for both Etsy and Unsplash. And as you can see, I've hidden them from you because I don't want you to see them just now. And then also I've copy pasted these GraphQL files that came with the actual download zip that I did. And in here you can find all the things that we saw in GraphQL Studio as well. So in GraphQL Studio we have a schema, we have all these operations, and we've actually downloaded that entire schema to my computer. So on my computer I'm able to do much more with this information, because of course in VS Code I can make changes to the schema, I can make changes to the operations, I can integrate them with an application. There's so much I can do. And later on, I can also use my own data sources in here instead of using these pre-configured ones from this scenario Etsy. So for Etsy, you can see we have a REST API. Let me check for Airtable. If we also, it's the other file, of course, for Airtable, we're also using a REST API. And how this works is something I'm going to show you just in a bit. We also have the index file. Get rid of these subfiles. So let's do it like this. And now I should be able to get a terminal. And I want to have a terminal in my webinar file. So yes, please give me the terminal. I'm going to be setting my node version. Use whatever node version you prefer. I usually go with node 14. And then in here, I need to make sure that I'm logged in by running StepZen login. I know I'm already logged in because I'm basically building stuff in StepZen all day. So instead of StepZen login, let's just try and do StepZen start. And when I run StepZen start, it will look at my login credentials, while at the same time it will also look at the GraphQL files I have in this example. And then it starts deploying it. Go back here. You can see it's actually looking for changes. So let me share in the right direction. Yes, I am. So let's try to start it again. And now you can see I'm actually starting a previous configuration that I need to stop somewhere. So yeah, let me go over this before. So what's going on here? We have the index.graphql file, which you can see we have two files. So we have our Etsy file and we have our Unsplash file, and we want to bring them together. So these two schemas, by using this custom directive called SDL, we're going to be bringing these two files together. So there's an array, meaning it's multiple files. And then we have a query type for the operations, which will get operations from all these files. And these files are the ones we just downloaded from Studio. So what we have over here is our type query, and we have some other types as well. And these are all types that are returned from our operations. Let me see if we have some. Do we have some annotations here? Maybe we have, maybe we won't. No, we won't. It's perfectly fine. And then here you can see we have all these things defined. And these are connected using the address directive. So the address directive is the one we're using to go back to find shops. Yeah, so we're finding shops and we're using an open API endpoint for searching shops by name. So this is an endpoint from Etsy, which StepZen is using in order to create a GraphQL API. So before we saw we have our operation, Etsy find shops. We have arguments that we can deliver, like a limit or an offset or the shop name. And then we will have a return type called Etsy shops, which was the return type we saw before. And then we can see we have the address directive. And this custom directive is specifically tailored to StepZen. So what you can see here, we have headers. And the header provided with a name is called XAPI key, which will make sure that our client key, which we have from StepZen, will be sending to the actual Open API, because the Open API is going to be needing it in order to return us the results. And you can basically do this with any other REST API. And so you can just insert your own REST API. So let's say we have my.api.com. You have maybe multiple versions, maybe you have just version 1, and you want to get any other information, maybe like posts. You can just do it at this and insert your own API key. And then, of course, in your operation, make sure that you're actually doing this. But for now, we have pre-configured this for you, so you can already start using Etsy. The cool thing about this is if you're relying on Etsy and they change something to their API, we're going to know and we're going to change it for you already. So you don't have to do any extra development in order to make this work on the long run. And the final thing you can see here is configuration, which is Etsy config. And this is the way it will get my API key. So it will get my API key from my YAML file. So if I will be opening this part, it will have my Etsy configuration, including my client's API key, which is something I won't be sharing with you. But if you're building this yourself, then of course you need to be using this. So this is for Etsy. So let me get back to the thing I was actually doing before, like bringing your own data sources. And for this, I'll be going to my projects files. Here I'm going to be finding a demo I made for you with a REST example. It's going to start VS Code. And then just make sure I set my node version. Here it is for you, so it's all clear. So this makes it sure. So I should have added this file here, which tells me a lot. So what I've done in this file is actually I made some REST APIs for you that I've linked together in this way. So I'm using a mock JSON server. Let's try out one of the APIs here. This is called my JSON server. My JSON server is a way to create a mock server based on a JSON file. So it's just this JSON file. You can see we have things in here like a white t-shirt, like a thumbnail, dog toys, prices, drill. And what I've done here, I use my JSON server in order to create a REST API for it. And it's a pretty cool service because it's going to mock a lot of stuff for you. So you can see we have a products endpoint. We can specify a certain product. So put product/1. We get my white t-shirt. We can go back. Product/2. Get my dog toy. I believe I can even filter things. Like filter or something like name is dog toy. Sure. This was it. Nevertheless, maybe I used it here. So at least we have this REST API to get products and then a specific product. These will all have a thumbnail coming from Pexels, but later on we can also see if we can get our thumbnail from Unsplash, if we still have the time left for that. But for now, let's try and do something based on this REST API. So this is a mock REST API, but as we saw here, it can also be an API from Unsplash. It can be an API from Airtable. It can be an API from Etsy. It can basically be any API, some of which we have pre-configured for you in GraphQL Studio, and some of which we haven't. And if we haven't, you can define it yourself. So what I've done here, again, I have my index file. I have a schema for something called e-commerce.graphql, because I've built a mock GraphQL e-commerce API for you, or REST API actually, and I'm going to be querying with GraphQL. And in here you can see I created a schema for it. I created a type called query. In there I've defined several queries. So get products, get product ID, get rating or categories for a product. And you can see we're using the REST directive again. So we're actually wrapping a REST API in order to get this information in GraphQL. So this is the URL to my API. You can see with the $sign. I also have some query parameters that I sometimes want to give to it. So let's see how this works. So if we're going to use the operation the query get products, you're going to see a return type is actually an array of product. And a product looks like this. It has certain fields, just high-level fields like name, price, thumbnail, but it also has relational fields. And those relational fields are either to a category or to a rating. And in here you can see we're using another custom directive, and this directive is a Materializer. And this Materializer is a way to bring together queries using GraphQL schema design language. So we have a type called product, which is a GraphQL type. Even though it's coming from a REST API, it's still a GraphQL type. And one of its fields is called category. And the information from category is something we can get from another GraphQL query. And this GraphQL query is called getProducts categories. And as you can see here, getProduct categories is actually something we defined right in the same file that is calling a REST API. So to get product categories, we're calling a REST API. And this is a perfectly nice way to link them together, because instead of having to call both these APIs from your client or having to do separate GraphQL queries, you can now do them all at once. So if we will be trying this API, you can see if we would get it right here, we need to actually change this, and now we get the queries, the categories for product 1. And product 2 maybe also has some categories, yes. So product 1 has categories, which is fashion and t-shirts, which perfectly makes sense because, as you can see here, it's a white t-shirt. So pretty straightforward that would have the categories fashion and t-shirts in them. And a downside of REST API is that we can't have field categories here because REST APIs are usually strictly separated, because you have things like REST-ish and RESTful, and then there might be combinations. But true REST doesn't have any combination. So we're going to bring together this request to product/product ID together with /product/product ID /categories. So that's a mouthful. But still, we will be bringing together those two JSON blobs. So the blob with the product information and the blob with the category information. And this is all done by first create or get products query, create a get product categories query, define a parameter or an argument, because what we want to know is the product ID because we need it for a URL. So this wouldn't work if we don't insert a product category. And then a return type of this will be an array of category, the same as here. So this will also be an array of category. If you change this into something else, like maybe category, whenever we run this with StepZen, we're going to get issues because those types just don't align. And for rating to do the same, we just leave out rating now. And then you can see we have the query defined, so get product categories. It takes the argument product ID, which has the form ID, so make sure the forms align. And in here, we're going to be telling that the argument for get product categories, which is product ID, is coming from the field ID. And the field ID comes from this one. So all the information you have high level, that you don't have any materializers in there, it should come from this REST API directly. And then in here, we should be able to run StepZen start. Just first log in if you don't know it already, and then run StepZen start. And while we're waiting for this, might have a small lag here. It's going to be start deploying to StepZen. You can see here deployed successfully. So what's happening here is it's taken all the queries, so get product categories, get rating, get products, blah, 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 from this schema, because this schema is the one that's deployed to StepZen. You can see we can get products information. So we can try that query, find something here. I get products. And then if we were going to a REST endpoint, we have this REST endpoint. See, we have this information, ID, name, price, thumbnail. And this is exactly the information we will get here. Price, and thumbnail. Query this, like this information, it's exactly the same information that we have from a REST API. So nothing too fancy just yet. I mean, the true power of this comes whenever you start defining an ID. So let's try and get a product 1. This, and now it'll only get a first product. So this correlates to this REST endpoint. So if the REST endpoint /product/1, it will get our ID, it will get a name, a price, and thumbnail. It will just port our REST API to GraphQL. The nice part comes whenever we want to get category information here. So we could get category information, which maybe has a name, like this. And now it appends our categories. So we would have this REST API to get a product information, and then the same REST API on a different endpoint will give us the category information. So now with just GraphQL, we've combined them together, because what's happening in our schema is that we're actually merging these fields with the Materializer. So we can do get queries, get product categories, and so forth, and get the information like this. And the same goes for rating, because there's also a rating endpoint that will be merging like this. And the same actually happens if you don't define an ID, because it doesn't take the ID from the argument, but it does take the ID from the return field. So you can also get the categories for all the products. So now you can see we have all our product information. We have the white t-shirt with the categories fashion and t-shirt. We have the dog toy, which is category pets, and so forth. And the cool thing we could be doing is we can add other APIs in here as well. Because one thing you can do is you're not actually tied to using the same APIs. If we will be going back, and maybe we want to do something like get product images. Maybe you don't want to do it based on an ID. Maybe you want to do it based on the title, in example. If we will be going back to our REST API that we saw from Unsplash before, we could just change this to, I don't know, api.splash.com. So this is just an example, maybe something like version 1, and then, I don't know, keyword title. So something like this should also work if you want to maybe get the images information. And then, of course, you need to make sure that the fetch image type here would also correlate. So this is something I don't have time for to show you today, but something we can we'll definitely be working out on our YouTube channel. So in order for you to well, to have more overview on how to actually combine all these different APIs, because that's the true beauty of this. So we can either bring your own API, or we can bring APIs that are prefixed from our own GraphQL Studio. So in here, if we will be downloading this one again, we can also add them to this product and make sure that they are loaded. So let's try and download them again. So let me see. So go back to publish, download them. It will open the zip file. We should be able to get maybe our Etsy GraphQL file in there. Try and put it here. Just maybe rename it to Etsy. And then from here, we should also be able to add it in here. So we have schema /Etsy. Let's go back. Well.com. Save it. Now step 10 is going to see something changed. It didn't find the config.yaml file because in Etsy it's going to be relying on Etsy config. So which means we would also need to create a new file, config.yaml, and then make sure that a configuration set is in here. So if we would back to the stuff we downloaded, maybe it would just make more sense to copy paste this. So let me delete the one I created and get this one up there. And put it here. Now we're going to see, might be useful to, it's already looking for a restart, so should have been a bit more patient. And now it's actually going to take a configuration set here as well. And then to actually use Etsy, make sure to use the Etsy API key and insert it here. So your API key could be something like blah blah blah. It's not a real API key, but it's just for show. But the things that's being put in here, you can see it also has our Etsy types now, which means that you can also start putting them together. So maybe for a product you have, you can find something else that might be on there on Etsy as well. So we would be looking for, I don't know, what could be cool to do. So we have our reviews. So maybe you're also a seller on Etsy. So right below the products you have, so let's assume all this information in this API for my own is also the information of stuff I'm selling on Etsy. Then something you could bring together is maybe the get reviews by shop, because of course you want to show people that you have very good reviews. Or maybe just get the shop information at all, which means that, well, the things we did before, we had here our query to products, like this, like get products, title, what we call it, name, like category, we have category which also has a name. Means in the same thing, you can also now do all the Etsy queries. So you can have Etsy get shop, and as I didn't insert my client credentials just yet, it won't work. But it's something to keep in mind. So this is something else you can do, bring these queries together, bring them together at one. And then if you really want to get funky, you can merge them together as well. So all the Etsy types here will also become available here. So if you want to add information to this, like maybe you want to have your Etsy listing, you can do it like this, like have your Etsy listing, the Etsy shop listing, and then in here you can merge any Etsy find, Etsy get listing, so like this. And then you would need to have a listing ID or something, which should come from your data. So this is another way to bring these things together. And as I'm lacking a bit of time, I won't be showing you this today, but we'll make sure to get more information about how to combine these kinds of things on our YouTube channel as well, or either on a blog, which are great sources to learn StepZen. So hopefully the information so far was useful to you. Maybe you have some questions for me as well. And if you don't, that's also completely fine. Then I would like to thank everyone. And then hopefully we'll see you around for another live stream shortly, because we have another one coming up in a couple of days. So if I'm wrong, it's on next week. So make sure to keep track of our YouTube channel and also sign up for the next one. So thanks you everyone.